President Mahama has hit hard at the MPP for describing his government as incompetent and also borrowing excessively.
To get into an argument on infrastructure with the MPP, because I've heard after the budget, people say infrastructure to GDP is something. I mean, don't talk about infrastructure. Because if it's infrastructure, education, health, water, electricity, roads, you cannot compare that record. Regional capital road improvement projects. And we started in Accra. Some of the roads that we have started doing are in front of the same MPP people's houses. They wake up in the morning and suddenly they see asphalt on their road. Where do they think the money is coming from?
At his Changing Lives Forum in Accra this afternoon, the president asked Ghanaians to retain him to continue his good job, which he says the new patriotic party has no merits to compare notes.
We started with the Better Ghana agenda, and then in 2012, we said advancing the Better Ghana agenda. In 2016, we say changing lives, transforming Ghana. Changing lives. Yes, we're transforming Ghana. People are now arising to build. We're changing lives and we're transforming Ghana. We're in the process of doing that. On 21st, out in your numbers and endorse that candidacy so that we can prove to our opponents that there is a solid and massive backing for the presidential candidate representing us in 2016.
So how good does this media battle look for the country? Should government at least pay attention to some of these criticisms, or should they be taken as merely political points? What are all of these? Their implications on the country's development. This is today's big story. My name is Aisha Ibrahim. The president seemed very angry at comments from both minority MPs and the vice presidential candidate, Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia of the NPP, at the describing the economy to be in bad shape after the 2016 budget was presented to Parliament. Let's listen to the president.
I don't need to get into an argument on infrastructure with the MPP. Because I've heard after the budget, people say infrastructure to GDP is something. I mean, don't talk about infrastructure. Because if it's infrastructure, education, health, water, electricity, roads, you cannot compare that record. In the short period we've been in power, yes, we've spent money. Yes, we've spent money on infrastructure. And it is necessary to spend money on infrastructure. They accuse us of borrowing a lot. But you can see the results of the borrowing. If you have a business and you need capital and you don't have the capital, what do? You go to the bank and borrow. If you borrow and you invest, then it's not a wrong thing. It's a positive thing because that investment will pay off. All the hospitals we built around this country, you think that the good health it will give Ghanaians is not an investment and that is not worth it? We've spent more than $1.5 billion building health facilities, polyclinics, hospitals, district hospitals, CHIPS compounds. You call that a waste? Ghanaians don't deserve good health. They have national health insurance cards, and yet there's no health facility in their community. What's the use? And so we go and put a polyclinic in the community, and you call that a waste, and you say we borrowed too much. The roads, we're doing the roads all over the country. We're doing regional capital road improvement projects. And we started in Accra. Some of the roads that we have started doing are in front of the same MPP people's houses. They wake up in the morning and suddenly they see asphalt on their road. Where do they think the money is coming from? One touch to my mama.
We'll be joined shortly by the communications director of vice communications director of the NPP, Anthony Kabo. We'll also be joined by a political analyst on the phone, and right now on the phone also is a member of Parliament's Finance Committee, Kweku Kwating. Many thanks for your time on today's big story. Hello, Kweku. Many thanks for your time on today's big story.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
The president has explained that he's borrowing for infrastructural development. Is it a big deal to borrow for such development?
Well, there's nothing wrong with borrowing, but it just doesn't make sense to borrow to consume, to borrow and put in recurrent expenditure. It is like borrowing to have a party and to move around to visit friends. Yes, you may want to do those things. But once you borrow, it is expected that you put it into a venture, even at the individual level. You put it into a venture so that that venture would repair itself. The situation Ghana finds itself in is that we are now borrowing to survive. And if the president is minded, I want to reproduce these figures from the budget statement they themselves have been putting out. In 2009, if you look at 2009, the total borrowing, net borrowing in 2009 was 3.6 billion Ghana cedis. 3.6 billion. If you look at how much of that went into capital expenditure, it was 2.496 billion, about 2.5 billion. That is just about 69%. That was 2009. You move on to 2010. We borrowed 4.2, net borrowing in 2010 was 4.3 billion. How much did we put into capital expenditure? 3.1. That was 74%. 2011, we borrowed 6.1. How much did we put into capital expenditure? 3.7. That was 60%. So 40% of the money we borrowed has gone into recurrent expenditure. In 2012, we borrowed 11.5 net borrowing, 11.5 billion. How much did we put into capital expenditure? We just put 4.9 billion. That gives you about 43%. So of the money we borrowed, we put only 43% into capital expenditure. In 2013, we borrowed 16.7 billion. How much did we put into capital expenditure? 4.8 billion. What is the percentage? 28.6%. As a country, you borrow 16.7 billion in a year. And how much of that do you put into capital expenditure that the president says is using to build the economy? 28.6%. In 2014, we borrowed 27.7 billion net for 2014. How much did we put into capital expenditure? Just about 6 billion. What is the percentage? 22%. Now, when people tell the president that this is unsustainable, you cannot borrow to consume, I think the president and the government ought to accept this reality. These figures are coming from their own budget statements, and to say that these are the interventions we are putting in place to check government expenditure so we won't have to borrow to consume. If we continue like this, a time is going to come when nobody will lend to us. Already, we are beginning to see that on the capital market. Kenya goes and gets 6.6. Cote d'Ivoire goes, they get 6.5. Ghana goes, the investors say, if you are not going to give us 10.75, we will not lend to you. The signs are beginning to appear on the wall. If we will accept it and do something about it, it is good for us. If we will descend into this kind of rhetoric that, oh, we are borrowing to do business and mix it up with all the politics, and that, we'll be driving ourselves into the ditch. That's my advice to the president.
But the president explains clearly that this did not happen today, did not start today. It's accumulative, it's accumulated from substantive government and also the government that it took over from. And that's why the country has gotten itself into this. Tell me, what are the realities and how bad is it? Because government is saying that we're doing much to sustain this economy. And here we are, we keep on hearing the economy is going down. Can you explain to us how bad the economy is?
Well, if you want to know how bad the economy is, you should ask yourself, why Ghana, Kenya, Cote d'Ivoire, all other countries go to the capital market to borrow on the strength of their macroeconomics. And then they say we'll give you 6%. Kenya will give you this. Ghana goes, they say 10.7%. Why? We should be asking ourselves. That's the first question. The second point, the first point. The second point, you know, I have outgrown this. Oh, some government did it. Even if we were borrowing, some government also borrowed. And we degenerate important discussions about the economy into previous governments and current government. The reality is this, that where we are now, the path is unsustainable. Whether that path was traversed by previous government or not, the reality facing the people to whom a mandate has been given is that the path we are treading now is unsustainable. And if we doubt that, let us begin to examine the things that are happening in our economy. In 2016, we were told that interest payment, that is the money we are paying on the interest, just the interest around the borrowings we have done, 10.5 billion, the second largest expenditure after wages, that is going to be 11.7. This is the reality. If we want to accept it, it is good for us. But to even answer head on this question about is accumulative and all that, this government inherited a debt of 9.5 billion Ghana cedis in January 2009. At that time, it was 31% of GDP. Today, that has escalated to 92 billion. That does not include the current Eurobond borrowing we did. If you add that, we will be probably reaching well over 100 billion from 9.5 billion. Again, if we want to look at this and do something about it, it's up to us. If we want to degenerate into, but the debts are from previous government, it's up to us. It just reflects the fact that we probably are not serious about dealing with the problems that are facing us. A time is going to come when government will not get anybody to borrow from, because already the signs are beginning to appear on the wall.
Honorable, I'll have you hold because I have Anthony Cabo. He's Deputy Communications Director of the NPP. Many thanks for your time on today's big story. But the president says that the NPP performed poorly. And so the NPP has no locus at all to judge the NDC and say that the NDC government is incompetent. How do you respond to this?
Hello?
Mr. Nkabo,
Yes.
you're on today's big story. I'm saying that President Mahama has described the NPP's administration as one of the worst. And so the NPP has no locus to judge the NDC and even describe it as incompetent. How do you respond to this?
Well, my sister, let me say good evening to your viewers. And to also state that I don't know if exactly what you just said to me is what exactly the president said. And the president said that Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia and the NPP have been labeling him as incompetent. And
exactly so.
And exactly, the president and his administration have displayed a lot of gross incompetence in the management of the economy. And we would not renege on making that point, because the record of this government over the last 7 years doesn't support any assessment that claims that the government is competent. It is a lot of incompetence that we have witnessed. Look at the spiraling public debt, where we have gotten to. Look at where inflation is. Look at the proceeds that we have from oil, from gold, from cocoa, and still this government is unable to pay statutory payments to NHIS. They are unable to settle arrears of GET funds. They are unable to settle the arrears in the District Common Fund, and many other statutory funds. And so if we make the point that the president and his administration is incompetently managing the economy, we are very right. And that assessment will have to stick. And
your vice presidential candidate, Dr. Bawumia, described the government as borrowing excessively. But the president has explained that he's using those loans for infrastructural development. Isn't it not unfair to make those comments when the president is actually using those loans for infrastructural development, as he puts it?
Well, every government comes into office with the with investments in infrastructure. And if you recall what the president said in 2008 when he was a running mate, that this whole business of comparison between the NPP about projects and boasting about projects is an exercise in mediocrity. And so clearly, the president himself discounts the idea of comparing projects. But let me even go to some specifics here. If you compare the amount of money that the NPP invested over the last 8 years in infrastructure development alone, 9.4% of GDP, compared to the 7 years of the NDC with all the loans over $35 billion which they have received, they have only invested 4.8 in investment. So if the president wants us to go into that sort of comparison, clearly the NDC has very little in terms of investments, in terms of infrastructure investments compared to the NPP, it's 8 years. But that's not even the point. The point really is, what are the deliverables? What are the things that the president has been able to deliver?
The president has mentioned that he's been he's constructed road. He mentioned the Fofosu Solar Road. He's mentioned the Circle interchange. He's mentioned some clinics he's putting up. He's mentioned educational infrastructure.
I can point to you the same infrastructure that President Kufuor had put together. I can point 1,001 of the same investments in infrastructure. The point I just made to you is that if you compare in nominal terms, percentages of GDP, you will realize that under the NPP, we invested 9.4% of our GDP in infrastructure compared to the 4.8 that the NDC has done over the last 7 years. So in terms of the record of infrastructure, you can't compare the NPP to the NDC. The figures speak for themselves. I'm not cooking up these figures. These figures are coming from the IMF managing director in Ghana and her own assessment of this economy. So if the president is making the point that you need to be at the presidency, you need to have been a president before you understand and be able to criticize him, I find that particular argument very regrettable. Where did President Nkrumah come from? With what experience did he become president of the Republic? Where did President Kufuor come from? With what experience did he become president of the Republic? Where did General Rawlings come from? And with what experience did he become president of the Republic? Rather, it is this president with all the experience that he has gathered as a member of parliament, as a deputy minister of communication, and as a vice president, and today as president of the Republic. The record is abysmal with all the experience. So clearly, the incompetence that we talk about is manifest.
Well, many thanks to you, Mr. Anthony Nkabo, is Deputy Communications Director of the MPP. On the other phone line is the Honorable Kweku Kwarteng. The president seemed to be unhappy about your comments or your tagging of the 2016 budget as a dead good budget. And he goes on to say that if you think it's a dead good budget, there's no need going to debate it. Would you take his advice?
Well, I just don't see that point. And I think the president must go beyond engagement with these petty matters. As a president, people collect tax, people work in the sun, they toil, they collect their taxes, they give it to you, they say manage it. If things go wrong, in 4 years people cannot get regular supply of power to do little things like barbering work, hairdressing work, people have a reason to complain. And I think the president should be focusing more on Ghanaians. If he's going to be so concerned about the politics of these matters, to the extent of suggesting that people if you think it's a dead good, I think it's petty. The president should go beyond that. By now, he ought to be asking his own ministers and his advisors, how come that in 2008, without oil, the economy expanded by 9.1%. In 2011, when oil came on stream, we hit 14%. Consistently, we have come drop. Economic activity has slowed down. Last year, we did 4%. This year, we are told that we will do 4.1%. The government, the president has to look at these figures and to ask, what is it that I can do to turn things round? And not bother himself about somebody calling his budget a dead good. That is not his mandate. You think the reason we keep a president there, we feed him, we feed his family, we give him everything. We do that so that he will solve our problems. The president must focus on the problems and solve them, and not get into this business about if you say it's a dead good, then don't criticize. And so what, does that give people power?
Well, many thanks to Kweku Kwarteng. He's a member of parliament for Obuasi, and he's also a member of the Finance Committee of Parliament. On the other phone line is Joe Jackson. He's a political analyst. Mr. Joe Jackson, we've had two governments, the NDC and the MPP, now comparing notes. Is it not worrying for the country that it should rather be the case of one learning from the other's mistake? But here we are comparing notes.
Good evening, Aisha, and good evening to all your viewers and listeners. No, it is not worrying at all. And it is quite normal at this stage to start having a debate as to whose policies have worked better for this country. And for us to start making choices amongst the two institutions as to which one has a better plan for the economy or better able to manage this economy. I think it is a step in the right direction that the debate has started. We just hope that the debate won't degenerate into name-calling and insults and will remain, and the debate would stay at a level where we can now start to really ponder over real alternatives to managing this economy. But I don't have any problem about what the president said this morning. He's undertaking his first stab at regular politicking. The political season is in with us. It's a year to go to the election. There's nothing wrong with what he said.
One school of thought will say that instead of the president ignoring some of these comments because it's coming from the opposition, it would rather be in the interest of the country if the president would take comments, some of these comments from people like Dr. Barima, who have been at the Bank of Ghana, who really know what the dynamics of our economy is about. You think same?
Unfortunately, I can't agree with that. You have a situation where Dr. Barima is seeking to unseat this president. He cannot then go around and start to take advice from Ms. Barima. That would be saying that I'm lost, and that if he starts to take advice from Barima, then we might as well get rid of him and put Barima.
Well, politics were playing that because one party wants to unseat the other, even if he's doing well, we must always criticize. Are we not throwing this country into a ditch by engaging in this kind of politics?
Unfortunately, that is the political system we have chosen. And you know what they say about democracy? If you think it is expensive and difficult, try the alternative. The truth of the matter is that we have to choose between competing ideologies, between competing ideas for managing this economy, between competing methodologies. And that is so. We do so because that gives us the right to get rid of you if we are not happy with you.
Well, many thanks to you, Joe Jackson. That's all time will allow us. Many thanks for your time on today's Big Story. In the studio with me is Afre Nyama, Kwachi Afre Nyama, who was at the Changing Lives Forum by President Mahama. Afre, what were the highlights of the president's speech today? I know about his response to the NPP. What other things did he talk about this afternoon?
Well, we know that, first of all, he's been to the 9 other regions. This is a climax of his Changing Lives tour, and ending here, of course, in the Greater Accra region. There's a program lined up for today and tomorrow as well. And what happened earlier today, there was the cutting of the salt for the Nima drains. But aside the point that he makes about the MPP and the key issues he raised there, he responded to what we've heard all along, MPP communicators accusing him of being incompetent. And he says that none of them have been close to the presidency before. But it's not surprising that he's now attacking the MPP based on their own internal issues. Because I remember that some weeks ago when he picked his nomination forms, I spoke to Deputy General Secretary Kweku Anyidoho, and he made it clear that the party, the NDC, would adopt a deliberate strategy to use the MPP's own problems against them. So if we find President John Mahama talking today about the acid attack that eventually led to the death of former Upper East Regional Chairman Adams Mahama, it's not surprising. But beyond what President Mahama talked about in terms of the MPP's own problems and how they have to deal with it and all that, you had the national organizer Kofi Adams saying that insofar as the age debate is concerned, Nanado must not compare himself to the likes of Ouattara and Buhari.
Right.
And the argument he raises is that at a certain point in their own country's histories, the likes of Buhari, Ouattara, for example, was at a point a prime minister of his country, and Nanado, in this regard, cannot compare himself to that if the age debate comes in, because aside the factor of age, they had held the mantle of leadership in their countries in that high position as well.
Well, I've read Nyama. Many thanks for your time on today's big story. That's all time will allow us. We've been talking about President Mahama, who hit hard today on the NPP, and he's responded to a lot of the comments coming from the NPP, some being that the government is borrowing excessively, the others being that the NDC government is incompetent, and all the others. The president has been very angry with those comments, and we've had some responses from the NPP, and we've spoken to some political analysts who says that, we should expect more of this because we are getting into the political season. My name is Aisha. Many thanks for your time on today's big story.